The roar of a failing engine isn't just noise, it's a cry for help, a mechanical scream that most people would ignore. But for Caleb Monroe, a single dad with grease-stained hands and a heart heavier than the wrench he carried, it was a language he spoke fluently. Picture this, a dimly lit garage, the kind where the air smells of oil and dreams, where a flickering bulb swings overhead, casting shadows on a man hunched over a rusted motorcycle. Caleb wasn't just fixing a bike that night, he was piecing together the fragments of his life, one bolt at a time. His 5-year-old daughter, Ellie, slept in a makeshift bed of blankets in the corner, her soft snores blending with the clink of metal. The world outside was asleep, but Caleb was wide awake, driven by a promise he'd made to her, to keep going, no matter how broken things seemed. That's where this story begins, in the quiet chaos of a man who could hear what others couldn't, a man who fixed what experts deemed unfixable, until one day, his gift would take him to the heart of the Navy's most advanced engine, and change everything. Stick with me, because this isn't just a story about machines, it's about a father, a daughter, and a legacy that roared louder than any engine ever could. Caleb Monroe wasn't always a mechanic. 10 years ago, he was a dreamer, sketching blueprints for engines that could outrun the wind, his laughter filling rooms as he spun his wife, Sarah, around their tiny kitchen. They'd talk about the future, big plans, a house with a porch, maybe another kid to chase Ellie around the yard. But life doesn't care about plans. When Sarah got sick, the world tilted. Cancer doesn't negotiate, and it didn't care that Caleb was a good man or that Ellie was barely 2, clinging to her mom's leg. Sarah fought for a year, but the disease was relentless, and when she slipped away, she took half of Caleb's soul with her. He didn't cry at the funeral, not because he wasn't broken, but because Ellie was watching, her tiny hand in his, and he knew he had to be her rock. So, he buried his grief in work, trading his engineering dreams for a wrench and a garage job that paid just enough to keep the lights on. The world saw a single dad scraping by, but Caleb saw a mission, to give Ellie a life worth living, even if it meant working through the night, every night. The garage was his sanctuary, a place where he could control something in a world that felt uncontrollable. Machines made sense, unlike grief, unlike bills piling up on the kitchen counter. Caleb had a gift, one he didn't talk about because it sounded crazy. He could hear what was wrong with an engine, like a doctor listening to a heartbeat. A faint whine, a subtle clunk, a stutter in the rhythm, others heard noise, but Caleb heard a story. It started when he was a kid, tinkering with his dad's old Ford, catching a misfire no one else noticed. By 16, he was fixing neighbors' cars, earning a reputation in his small town of Willow Creek, Oregon. But after Sarah's death, that gift became his lifeline. He'd take on jobs no one else wanted, engines so broken they were destined for the scrapyard. Caleb can fix anything, the locals said, half in awe, half in disbelief. They didn't know he wasn't just fixing machines, he was fixing himself, proving he could still make something whole. One night, as rain battered the garage roof, Caleb was working on a '67 Mustang that had been sitting in a barn for decades. The owner, a gruff old man named Hank, had been told by 3 shops that it was beyond repair. Just scrap it, they said. But Hank had heard about Caleb, the guy who didn't give up. Caleb ran his hands over the engine, listening to its coughs and sputters like a composer tuning an orchestra. Ellie was there, as always. Coloring in a book about airplanes, her crayons scattered across a toolbox. "Daddy, why's it so loud?" she asked, her voice small but curious. Caleb smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's talking, sweetheart. Telling me what's wrong." She giggled, thinking it was a game, but Caleb was serious. He closed his eyes, letting the engine's rhythm guide him. A faint tick, almost imperceptible, caught his ear, a valve out of sync, a whisper of failure. He adjusted it, tightened a loose bolt, and when he turned the key, the Mustang roared to life, smooth as a lullaby. Hank's jaw dropped when he picked it up the next day. "How'd you do that?" he demanded. Caleb just shrugged. Listened. Word spread. Soon, Caleb's garage was a pilgrimage site for hopeless cases, cars, tractors, even a vintage plane engine once. People came from neighboring towns, then neighboring counties. They brought their broken machines and their stories, and Caleb fixed both, in his way. He'd listen to a widow talk about her late husband's Chevy, or a farmer lamenting his busted combine, and somehow, he'd make it right. But it wasn't just skill, it was heart. Every fix was for Ellie, every late night a step toward a better future. He'd promised Sarah he'd give their girl everything, and he meant it. Still, the money was tight. The garage was a rental, the landlord impatient, and Ellie's school supplies weren't cheap. Caleb didn't complain, but the weight was there, in the lines on his face, in the way he'd stare at Ellie's drawings on the fridge, wondering if he was enough. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, the kind of gray morning where the air feels heavy with secrets. A man in a crisp suit walked into the garage, his polished shoes out of place among the oil stains. He introduced himself as Tom Carver, a liaison for a defense contractor working with the Navy. "Heard you're the guy who fixes the unfixable," Tom said, his tone skeptical but curious. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, sizing him up. "Depends on what's broken." Tom didn't smile. He explained that a prototype engine, a classified project for the Navy's next-generation fighter jet, was failing. The best engineers in the country had tried to fix it, but the problem was elusive, a ghost in the machine. "They say you hear things others don't," Tom said. "We're desperate. You in?" Caleb glanced at Ellie, playing with a toy wrench nearby. The job was out of state, a week at least, and he'd never left her before. But the pay was more than he'd make in a year. For her, he thought. He nodded. "I'm in." The next week was a blur. Caleb arranged for Ellie to stay with his sister, packed a bag, and flew to a naval base in Virginia. The facility was a maze of concrete and steel, guarded by men with rifles and no sense of humor. The engine was a beast, a sleek marvel of technology that looked more like a spaceship than anything Caleb had ever touched. The lead engineer, Drive, Evelyn Hart, was a woman with sharp eyes and sharper words. "No offense," she said, "but I don't know why they brought a small-town mechanic here. This isn't a tractor." Caleb didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. They showed him the engine, its hum jagged and wrong, like a song out of tune. The team had run diagnostics, torn it apart, rebuilt it, nothing worked. Caleb didn't touch the computers. He leaned in, closed his eyes, and listened. There it was, a faint pulse, irregular, like a skipped heartbeat. "It's in the fuel injector," he said after 10 minutes. Evelyn scoffed. "We checked that. Twice." Caleb didn't argue. He asked for a wrench. For 3 days, he worked, guided by sound alone. The team watched, half curious, half annoyed. He adjusted components they'd overlooked, recalibrated systems they'd deemed perfect. On the 4th day, he turned the engine on. It purred, flawless, a symphony of power. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "How?" she asked. Caleb shrugged. "I listened." The team was stunned, but Caleb was already thinking of Ellie, of the life this job could give her. He didn't know then that this was just the beginning, that the Navy had bigger plans, that his gift would be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. But for now, he was just a dad, heading home to his girl, a spark of hope reignited in his chest.